Hello, welcome to our RecapPlus channel with me, Matthew. Today we will watch a recap movie called The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, released in 2021. This is a spoiler content video. So please turn on the subtitle and let's start the story. On July 18, 1981, in the town of Brookfield, Connecticut, Ed and Lorraine Warren, along with their cameraman Drew, were summoned to the Glatzel residence to witness the exorcism of 8-year-old David Glatzel. Present in the house were David's parents, Carl and Judy, his sister Debbie, and her boyfriend Arnie. The two demonologists, Drew and Father Gordon, prepared for the exorcism. The state of the house bore witness to the malevolent presence within. Chandeliers hung broken, wallpaper was shredded to pieces, and shattered glass littered the once peaceful rooms. It was clear that a demonic entity had wreaked havoc on the home. In a moment of compassion, Ed extended empathy to the exhausted young boy and suggested that he take a nap. Arnie, Debbie's boyfriend, kindly offered to carry David to his room upstairs, and in that tender moment, a sense of warmth enveloped them all. Arnie offered reassurance to the young boy, promising him that he would protect him from any harm. However, David had no inkling of the lengths Arnie would go to in order to safeguard him. As time passed, David abruptly awoke from his slumber, startled by pounding noises at his door. Terrified, he sprinted towards the bathroom, seeking refuge behind the shower curtains. The doorknob rattled ominously, as if an unseen force was attempting to gain entry. A tense silence hung in the air, but David sensed the ominous presence in the room. His gaze rose upward, revealing a ghastly, blackened hand creeping over the curtain rod. The faucet emitted a spine-chilling creak, and what flowed from the shower head was not water but a horrifying cascade of blood. In the midst of his son's screams, Carl rushed into the bathroom and found David seemingly unaffected, standing near the cabinet as if nothing had transpired. In a sudden, violent outburst, David attacked his father, stabbing him in the thigh with a warlike cry. Just as David prepared to strike Carl again, Ed intervened, lifting the possessed boy and urging Father Gordon to initiate the exorcism without delay. David was placed on the living room table, and forcibly held down as the priest commenced the process. The boy's body contorted unnaturally, while Lorraine began to witness flashes of demonic rituals. For a fleeting moment, an eerie calm enveloped the room, but it was shattered as plates flew out of the cupboard, one striking Father Gordon in the head. The ritual remained incomplete, and the demon within David launched a ferocious attack on Ed, attempting to seize his heart. In a desperate attempt to protect David, Arnie threw himself between them, offering himself to the demon in exchange for the boy's safety. The exorcism of David proved successful, but it left Ed in a coma. Months of torment for the young boy had finally come to an end. However, for Arnie Johnson, it marked only the beginning of his harrowing journey. Several months later, Debbie and Arnie found themselves living and working with Bruno Saul, the lively owner of a local dog kennel. Meanwhile, Ed lay unconscious in the hospital, while Lorraine reminisced about the early days of their acquaintance. Suddenly, Ed gasped awake, urgently instructing his wife to warn the Glatzels about the demon's presence surrounding Arnie. Lorraine immediately contacted the police, forewarning them of an impending tragedy at the kennel. Amidst the backdrop of dancing at the kennel, Arnie's condition worsened. His hallucinations grew more intense, beads of sweat poured down his face, and he struggled for breath, feeling as though he were submerged underwater. In a moment of sheer panic, he perceived his landlord as a demonic entity intent on killing him. Driven to a frenzied state, he drew a knife and ruthlessly stabbed Bruno 22 times, ending his life abruptly. Subsequently, Arnie was apprehended by the police, stumbling along the sidewalk, drenched in the victim's blood. In the interrogation room, Lorraine and Ed argued that Arnie was not currently possessed by any entity, as he was able to read the Bible without faltering. Debbie fervently defended her boyfriend, vehemently asserting that the true killer was not Arnie. The two demonologists sought to convince Arnie's lawyer by presenting evidence of past discoveries, notably Annabelle. However, the question remained, how would they prove Arnie's innocence in the courtroom? The scene then transitions to the courtroom itself. Arnie's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty by reason of demonic possession. Following this plea, Ed and Lorraine embarked on the task of gathering evidence for the case. They traced the origins of David's possession, delving into where it all began, 5 months prior to the exorcism. In those earlier days, the Glatzel family had just moved into their new home. David, filled with childlike enthusiasm, stumbled upon a waterbed, unaware that it would become the epicenter of the demon's malevolence. A sinister force tore open the bed's fabric, causing water to gush out, leaving David drenched, trembling, and gripped by fear. Returning to the present, Ed uncovered rotting wood in the very spot where the waterbed had once stood. The extent of the damage could not be attributed to mere water exposure. Lorraine decided to explore the basement beneath the decaying floor. There, amidst a horde of rats, she discovered a witch's totem, a tool employed by Satanists in their sinister rituals. The Warrens firmly believed that David had been cursed, and during the exorcism, that curse had been transferred to Arnie. Convinced that the occult was at play, the Warrens enlisted the assistance of Drew, their cameraman. They disseminated pictures of the totem to all local police stations, hoping for any information that might help their case. Father Gordon's suggestion led them to visit a former priest named Kesna, who possessed knowledge of a cult known as the Disciples of the Ram. Kesna guided them to his basement, imparting his understanding of how curses and totems functioned. He also issued a grave warning, predicting that Arnie was on a path leading to the death chamber. Saving him would require all of their abilities. Amidst these unfolding events, an unidentified woman, the same one who had haunted Arnie previously, embarked on another satanic ritual. The narrative then shifts back to Arnie himself. That night in jail, Arnie was burdened with the return of the demon's torment. He began experiencing strange and unsettling phenomena, hearing eerie sounds, and witnessing bizarre sights. Among these unsettling occurrences, he noticed a fellow inmate in the psych ward humming the same haunting tune that had played when Bruno met his tragic end. Meanwhile, Ed received an important call from Drew, who had stumbled upon a lead in Jessica's murder case. A homicide detective had come across a similar totem in Danvers, Massachusetts. In a meeting with this detective named Clay, they learned about two girls, Katie and Jessica, who had vanished approximately 4 months ago in a nearby forest. Katie's lifeless body had been discovered, bearing 22 stab wounds, reminiscent of Bruno's gruesome fate. However, Jessica remained missing, and the same sinister totem had been found at the gruesome crime scene. With shared interests and a determination to uncover the truth, both parties agreed to collaborate. Detective Clay sought assurance from Lorraine, ensuring that her extraordinary gift of seeing beyond the ordinary was genuine. Simultaneously, David, Debbie, and Arnie met up as planned. Arnie hesitated to divulge the chilling experiences he had endured, but David understood the bone-chilling coldness and the eerie unknown that Arnie had traversed. Debbie inquired about the demon's instructions to Arnie. As events unfolded, the narrative shifted to the forest where Katie had met her tragic end. Lorraine was overwhelmed by an ominous sense that something dreadful had transpired there. In a moment of eerie connection, she was transported into a vision, witnessing Katie and Jessica sharing a moment of laughter. Suddenly, Jessica's eyes turned an eerie shade of white, and in a horrifying trance, she brutally stabbed Katie to death. As she snapped out of this nightmarish state, Jessica was overwhelmed with hysteria, fleeing into the darkness. Lorraine, compelled by a mysterious force, followed Jessica's frantic footsteps but lost sight of her. In a fateful misstep, Lorraine tumbled into a nearby river. Her senses nearly entranced her to follow the river's course, but she managed to regain control just in time. However, a sinister, otherworldly arm tried to drag her under, but her husband, Ed, came to her rescue. Clay and his team discovered a body at the river's bottom. While they awaited DNA results, Clay assured the Warrens that they would receive the case files to aid in their investigations. Meanwhile, Debbie made a distressing call to Ed, informing him that Arnie's demon had returned and was compelling her boyfriend to end his own life. Ed urgently advised her to inform the prison staff and ensure Arnie was placed under constant suicide watch. The call abruptly ended, followed by an eerie screech. Back in Arnie's cell, he appeared as petrified and trembling as David had been at the film's outset. Father Newman arrived and handed him a vial of holy water. As Arnie began experiencing visions once more, he positioned himself in the cell's center and created a protective circle using the holy water. The Warrens had broken into a funeral home in search of Jessica's body to investigate if the connection to Lorraine was still active. Lorraine touched Jessica's hand, entering the connection, and found herself in a dark basement. There, she saw stairs, an altar, black candles, and the same woman, the witch, who Arnie had encountered before. The witch was relentless, desperate to complete the curse she had on Arnie. She compelled him to shatter the holy water vial and nearly convinced him to harm himself. In a surprising turn, Lorraine intervened, severing the witch's connection to Arnie. Unbeknownst to her, this connection worked both ways. Back at the funeral home, Ed and Lorraine met Drew and Debbie. Arnie was now heavily sedated in prison. Drew shared a Renaissance book related to witchcraft that hinted at breaking a curse by destroying its altar. They also connected the dots between the two cases. Cultists possessed their victims, forcing them to commit heinous murders before taking their own lives. However, their conversation was abruptly halted when Ed collapsed, unconscious. Ed awoke in an unfamiliar bed, alone, and found Lorraine's cross lying on the floor near the main door. He encountered the witch, who taunted him about his relentless pursuit. Suddenly, the same towering corpse reappeared, threatening an attack. Ed, driven by fear, retaliated and nearly stabbed the figure. When the room returned to normal, he realized the shocking truth: he had almost killed his own wife. The witch had cunningly placed something in their house. Frantically, Ed noticed dead, blackened flowers lying on the table and discovered a totem concealed within a vase. Drew and Dad used the case files, along with clues from Lorraine's vision, like the muffled train sounds and the sound of water, to pinpoint the location of the witch's altar. They determined that Jessica had obtained her totem at Fairfield University, implying that the witch was nearby. Distressed, Ed grabbed his car keys and left, sensing imminent danger. While Lorraine sought Father Krasner's assistance, she was confronted with a shocking revelation: the witch was, in fact, the priest's daughter, Isla, and he had been aware of it all along. To make matters worse, he disclosed that the curse required 3 victims, one of whom was Ed himself, as a totem had been placed in his office. The creaking of wood signaled Isla's presence, and Krasner handed Lorraine a flashlight, instructing her to destroy the altar. He acknowledged his failure as a father, consumed by his obsession with witchcraft, and prayed for redemption. Tragically, just as Ayla stood behind him, she slit his throat. We catch a glimpse of Arnie waking up, warning Debbie and Father Newman that Isla is nearby and about to complete her curse. Cutting back to Lorraine, she locates the altar but struggles to destroy it. Meanwhile, Ed arrives at Krasner's house and hears Lorraine scream from underground. Determined, he attempts to break open the entrance. However, Isla holds his wife at knife point, but Lorraine manages to escape her grasp. Ed enters the tunnel, and Isla confronts him. He succumbs to a fit of rage as the witch attempts to possess him. Isla prepares for the final act. While at the prison, police arrive as Arnie loses control over his body, causing chaos. Lights go out, windows shatter, and a storm begins. We shift back and forth between Arnie and Ed, both struggling for control, while their partners are determined to save them. Debbie clings to Arnie's arm as he holds a shard of glass to his neck, while Lorraine pleads with Ed to remember their love and not to succumb to the darkness. The spell breaks when Ed remembers the moment he first saw Lorraine 30 years ago, and he swings the hammer not at Lorraine but at the altar. Arnie regains control of his mind, collapsing onto the floor in relief, cradled in Debbie's arms. It's over. Isla, still in denial, points a piece of glass at Ed but is reminded that her curse has been broken. She, too, experiences her body twisting, and she tragically slashes her throat, dying in a similar manner to her father. As the Warrens emerge from the dreaded tunnel, police sirens wail in the distance. They add the witch's altar chalice to the Warren Museum. Instead of receiving the predicted death penalty, Arnie is charged with manslaughter. He spends 5 years in prison, during which he marries Debbie. The film concludes with Ed and Lorraine, a bit older, as Ed surprises his wife by taking her to a gazebo reminiscent of their first date, where they spend their final moments in each other's arms, just like they did 30 years ago. To watch more video like this, click on the videos on your screen, and don't forget to let me know how you feel about today's video in the comments down below. And at last I will say, stay safe and stay healthy. See you next videos.